This is Cody McLean from the Mindhack podcast, a place where we explore the routines, mindset, and experiences of successful people in their field, whatever that field may be. Today, we're interviewing the highly successful co-founder of Entrepreneur First, Matt Clifford. He founded Entrepreneur First back in 2011 and has since had over 1,000 people go through their accelerator program, which has resulted in the launch of 200 plus companies worldwide, creating an estimated $1.5 billion in valuations. Entrepreneur First differs from other business accelerators like the Y Combinator by first finding the person and then matching that person with a co-founder. And only once they have a co-founder do they support them in the launch of their business. They focus on finding the right people, and this is the strategy that has attracted the legendary investor Reid Hoffman, who is the co-founder of LinkedIn. He invested $12.4 million back in 2017 and is now on the board of Entrepreneur First. They've been growing fast, and now they have 6 offices split across Europe and Asia. This is a conversation for any entrepreneur in the making. No matter what stage of the entrepreneurial journey you're in, you'll learn what the mom test is and how you can use it to validate your business idea. Find out why you should work at a startup before you decide to make your own startup, or even how to go from the idea to the startup stage. And lastly, we cover even how they got the legendary investor Reid Hoffman to become a backer. In this conversation, Matt shares the mindset, the successes, and even some of the downfalls he's had as an entrepreneur, and even how he grew Entrepreneur First to what it is today. So put on your business suit and get ready to learn from the founder of a company that helps people achieve their highest potential with one of the world's most unique accelerators. Please welcome Matt Clifford. Hi, Matt. Welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And so I want to start out and just ask you a big question. What is your why?
Yeah, I think it's one of the reasons that we start this business, Entrepreneur First, is that we started with this sort of huge idea, which was that it really matters what the world's most ambitious people do with their lives. And we felt that right now, in nearly everywhere in the world, perhaps outside Silicon Valley, far too much human potential was wasted on careers and jobs that constrained and restricted people instead of sort of amplifying the impacts they could have in the world. So kind of everything I've been doing over the last 8 years has been focused around that sort of big why, that idea that the world is missing out on some of its best founders. It matters what those people do with their lives. And, we believe our whole mission is around the belief that entrepreneurship maximizes human potential and impact. And the reason 8 years in, I still get out of bed every morning excited about what I do is the opportunity to help amplify the impact of some of the world's most talented people.
Yeah, that must be an empowering position to help others in some ways achieve their own ambitions. I have a competing thought on that. I know a while ago, Elon Musk actually, I think it may have been a Twitter tirade where he was a little upset over the fact that a lot of these founders, like they're trying to create the next Facebook or the next social media tool because they're focused purely on profits, whereas he tried to focus on the future of humankind. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like you see too many people just trying to make their own money, or are they trying to follow a vision or a dream that would help others and help the world?
There's nothing wrong with entrepreneurs wanting to create wealth by doing something valuable, but I don't think that is a sort of mission that for me would be inspiring enough to keep going on for many years and hopefully many decades. And so what we think about Entrepreneur First is the idea that if you're capable enough to be a great founder, if you have the smarts, the character, the resilience, then what that means is that your opportunity cost is really high. there are many ways to have impact outside entrepreneurship. You could go work for a great company, you go support someone else's entrepreneurial ambitions. And so what we always say to founders is there is no point. Your opportunity cost is too high to work on something small. And small may mean kind of financially, but more often what we're saying is your opportunity cost is too high to do something that doesn't really have the impact that you could have in the world. And so I think because that's our ethos and our mission, we're very lucky that in general the people we fund and the people we get to work with are people who want to do something huge, who want to rethink how the world solves some of its biggest problems, who want to use cutting edge technology to really attack some of the kind of most important challenges of human existence. And I think one way that we do that very practically is we say to people, don't get too excited about the idea of being a founder for its own sake. Instead, think about you and who you are and what your edge is. What is your personal competitive advantage? And what does that imply that you can do in the world uniquely? What does it mean that you're going to be better qualified to do or to change than anyone else? And I think if you follow that as a guiding principle, what is it about me that means I can do something that others can't do? And what problems does that lead me towards solving? Then I think you're going to get many more entrepreneurs who are doing big, ambitious things than they're just trying to build the next Me Too app or copycat social network.
What do you think is more important, the person or the idea?
Well, maybe I can be annoying and sort of slightly reject the premise of the question and say we always talk Entrepreneur First about founder idea fit. Product market fit is an idea that's kind of very popular in the venture capital world. The idea that when a product meets a market that needs it, then beautiful things happen. We think the same way about founders. We don't think there is really such a thing as a generically good founder. And actually, we don't think there's such a thing as a generically good idea. It's when the right founder meets the right idea that beautiful things happen. And so I think you can't have one without the other. And that's why this idea of edge that I mentioned in response to your last question is so important to the way we think. It's really what is it that you are uniquely well qualified to build as a founder? Really working on your edge and building the company that maximizes the value of you and what you're particularly good at. I think that's how you build an enduring and important business. Can you imagine a world? I always like this as a thought experiment. Imagine a world where Larry Page had started Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg had started Google. There's no way that either of those companies would be the companies that they are today. Founder idea fit is really the whole thing.
So how do you become a founder? I mean, surely do you think it's an attribute that we're born with, or do you think it's a skill and a mindset that you garner over time?
I think this is such an important question. It's actually one of the most important questions for the future of the economy globally, because I think the general conventional wisdom in a lot of places is that being a founder is almost a calling. Almost sometimes you hear people talk about being almost like a genetic inclination. And I totally reject that. I don't think that people are born founders at all. I think the inclination to found things, to entrepreneurship, is actually really mediated by culture. And I think, in fact, the culture that you're born in and that you're embedded in is the biggest predictor of whether or not you'll consider entrepreneurship. So I think, obviously there are skills and sort of character traits that I think make people better or less strong founders. But that would be true of any sort of high impact career. So, there are characteristics that make people better or worse executives or doctors or lawyers or whatever. But the decision to become a founder really comes from the environment. So, why is Silicon Valley so full of great founders? Not because there's something in the gene pool there, I think, but because it's the one place in the world where starting a company is the most socially approved thing to do with your life. If you grew up in, say, Singapore or London, two of the sites where we operate, 20 years ago, you weren't exposed to role models who were founders. You weren't exposed to a value system that said that being a founder was a good thing. And that's really why I'm so passionate about the mission of our company, is that what we're trying to do is create a little bubble of Silicon Valley norms and Silicon Valley culture in many, many cities around the world. And we think if we do that right, that will vastly expand the number of people who become great founders.
So I assume that you're on the bandwagon that you don't need to move to San Francisco in order to have a startup. And on that same note, a lot of people will go work at Google and then they quit Google after a few years and then they start their own startup. And I'm sure as I've interviewed a lot of CS students and understood their mindset. And a lot of them graduate from college and a lot of them go into jobs feeling like they can't be an entrepreneur. They don't have a business mindset. So what do you think it is that allows people to go work for these companies and then exit them and start either an idea that they've had or just be empowered in order to go up that challenge, go up that hill?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it comes down to like, what is the culture that you're operating in? What are the incentives that you face, and what are the resources that you have at your disposal? And again, one of the reasons that Silicon Valley is so successful in having people go work places like Google and then leave is that the culture approves it. The incentives are there in that kind of you see all around you people who've created wealth and had a lot of impact through founding. And the resources are available in that there's obviously in Silicon Valley a ton of capital available, even at the very earliest pre-company stage, to get people started. Now, when those three things are missing, as they're missing in most of the rest of the world, it's not a surprise that if the options that you feel like you face is stay working hard in the job you're in now, get a promotion, get a pay rise, have more impact, or throw that away or feel like you're throwing it away for the opportunity to build something, but without resources, without kind of approval from people around you, without that incentive structure, it's no surprise that it's not normal to do that. So I think I do agree with the first thing you said. I don't think you need to move to Silicon Valley or to San Francisco to start a company, but I do think you need to be exposed to that same set of mindsets and sort of cultural norms that make Silicon Valley so special. And as I say, I think that's something that Entrepreneur First can do is, what we want is if you walk into our office in London or in Singapore or in Bangalore, you shouldn't feel like you're in one of those, that city. You should feel like you're in a place where the culture is all about saying, what is it you can do? What is it you can build? And how can we help you?
Right. It reminds me of that Jim Rohn quote, you are the average of the 5 people you spend your time most with. And I found that I've been using this interesting software called focusmate.com, and it has webcams that you schedule a session with a stranger on the internet, and then you state your intentions and you simply have a web camera and then you see each other physically working. And somehow that accountability keeps me working. It's made me more productive. And equally so, when I've been in the right office environment, I walk away feeling inspired and motivated. And when you see another person making a better decision about whatever that decision may be, that inspires you to make that same decision. So I assume that that's the benefit of going to Silicon Valley. But as we're becoming more of a global entrepreneurial world, how do you think somebody should get started if they've never been an entrepreneur? Where do you see most of these founders that you interview at your accelerator? Where do they come from? What inspires them to reach out to you? Where did their initial idea come from? How do they find that, validate it, start it?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I would say is like there's an extraordinary diversity of answers to that question because there's an extraordinary diversity of people that we fund at Entrepreneur First. So this year we'll fund about 800 individuals. I think the youngest person we've ever funded was sort of 18 and didn't graduate high school, and the oldest was 67 and was the age that many people would consider retiring. So like where they get the inspiration from varies a lot. But sort of one sort of theme, which perhaps is surprising, is that a lot of these people we actually actively sourced and said to them, hey, you've got an interesting background. Have you ever thought about starting a company? And the reason we do that is that we believe that actually, again, to go back to this idea of culture, if you're embedded in a culture that does not talk about entrepreneurship, that doesn't valorize entrepreneurship, where it's not obvious how to start, it's sort of unreasonable to imagine that all the best potential founders are thinking about founding all the time. And so actually we actively approach people whose backgrounds suggest they could be great founders and say, do you want to give this a go? And we've structured our whole program to not require that people have done the upfront work because, a big part of the thesis is in most of the world that would be an abnormal thing to do. And so the reason we call ourselves a talent investor rather than an accelerator is when we're investing in these individuals, they often don't necessarily yet know exactly what they want to work on. And they almost certainly don't know who they want to work with. But our belief is it should be possible to become an entrepreneur purely on the basis of talent. It shouldn't be about, do you have an existing network? Are your parents wealthy enough that they can support you while you, go discover an idea? These shouldn't be the barriers to entry to building something significant as a company. And, that's why we built Entrepreneur First, was to try and remove all those barriers and make talent the only barrier.
That's interesting. So you look for the person and you actually reach out to people that perhaps they haven't even started a company. I'm curious if you can tell me what attributes you look for in a person that shows you an entrepreneur.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is, I think, the secret really of our success is this idea that we're just willing to go out and actually, now, to be clear, we don't drag people kicking and screaming like people have to want to start a company, but we're trying to broaden the acceptability of that idea. And so the things we look for, to be honest, they're probably not that groundbreaking or surprising. It's really sort of four things that we look for. So one is sort of problem solving. Like we often say, entrepreneurship is just applied problem solving. Founders face problems every day that they have to solve. So we're looking for people who are smart, tenacious problem solvers. That's the first thing. And, you can see evidence of that in such a broad series of ways. So, some of it's conventional. Someone maybe has a great degree from a great university and they went to get a great job. Some of it's totally unconventional. They've demonstrated that problem solving ability in a, way much more off the beaten track through, life or work experience. But we don't mind. We're not looking for badges. We're just looking for very, very smart problem solvers. So that's the first piece. The second piece is ambition. So we sort of already covered this. We really are all about the scale of the impact that it's possible to have through entrepreneurship. So we've got nothing against people that want to build small businesses that can provide a great income and lifestyle for them and their family. In fact, I really encourage people that want to do that. But it's not sort of our mission is not to find those people. Our mission is all about finding people who have unreasonably big ambitions and want to change the world through technology. So we're really screening for people that have that drive to do something huge. So that's the second thing that we look for. The third thing we look for relates to this idea I already mentioned around edge. So we look for people who have an edge in something, a personal competitive advantage. Now, again, that can be manifested in a very broad number of ways. One kind of edge could be technical. It could be that someone's just very, very, very strong in a particular area of technology. We've observed that either through, kind of their work or side projects outside their work. But then again, an edge could be something completely non-technical. It could be an area of domain expertise where someone just really understands the nature of a big problem or a big industry, and they want to use that expertise to disrupt that industry. Edge can look like many things, but essentially one way of thinking about it is we're looking for people who can bring something to the table that is somewhat unique or at least very rare, a rare skill or experience. And then the final thing we look for, the final category, is determination, or you could call it resilience. We're looking for people who there's some evidence that they're just not going to give up when they hit that first hurdle. It's very easy to be excited about being a founder in the first couple of weeks. But it's when you start getting the rejections, the no's from potential customers, it's when you start realizing that your competitors have a great offering and you're not sure how to compete. It's when, your star hire pulls out. It's all these things are where if you don't have resilience and determination, you're just going to stop. And so those four things, problem solving, ambition, edge, and determination, taken together, it doesn't guarantee that you'll be successful as a founder, but I think it gives you a lot better odds.
That reminds me of a story. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse because I almost always bring it up. There's back in 1519, the Captain Cortez landed in Veracruz, and upon arriving, he burnt his ships. And now that's a famous idiom, is that you can't go back. And at least with my story is I had a friend that was growing up, and he always was he wasn't really a friend. He was always trying to outdo me on everything. And the one thing he wasn't really able to outdo me on is when I started a business, and he started his own business. It ended up being a file uploading site. He was trying to replicate Mega Uploader, but his mom forced him to shut it down once they kept getting a bunch of DMCA complaints in the mail for all the pirated content on the platform. And unfortunately for him, he was fairly well off. He knew that his mom was paying him to go to college, that he would be able to work in his mom's business, and that he would be secure. And on the other hand, being in this experience where I lost my parents, where I had to support myself before I turned 18, in my mind, it was either I was going to be homeless or I was going to be successful. And there were so many times where I was burnt out and I didn't know what the term burnt out meant. It started from 16 onwards. And I like to use the phrase that my bridges or my boats, they were burnt for me.
Right.
And so I'm interested in knowing, what does resilience look like to you? Because I'm not sure I could honestly say that if I didn't go through the experience that I had, if I didn't drop out of high school myself and I had that option of going to work, having a job, I don't know if I would have had the perseverance or the grit necessary in order to go through all the grinding that you need to do, because that's really what separates the failures from the successes, right? Is that resilience factor. So I'm interested, how do you find people who have it? How do you garner it?
So it's very hard to identify it sort of outside in from, say, a LinkedIn profile or whatever. It's hard to say, oh, I've seen this person's resume and they look very resilient. We don't do that. Instead, this is one of the things that we interview for after we've started the conversation. And I think the way we think about it primarily is, has this person voluntarily taken the more difficult path at any point? So I think we've ended up creating, we meaning the world, I guess, or at least sort of the developed world, has a bunch of options for people, a little bit like your friend, where if you're fortunate, you could have this very tracked existence where you do well at school, then you do well at university, then you do well at your job, and you just kind of, you might feel stressed and you might feel under pressure, but you're basically constantly climbing a ladder. What we often think is, most people who are gonna be great founders will find that process very frustrating. They'll find it very constraining. And so when we think about resilience, part of what we're thinking about is there evidence that this person has willingly put themselves on a more difficult path, where they've exposed themselves to situations that weren't just climbing the path of least resistance, the next rung on the ladder? And if they have done that, how have they responded to adversity in those cases? So again, that could be any number of things. Often it's people relocating or migrating or taking the harder path for some reason, whether it's about their values or their goals. And it's really, a lot of our job is just to listen and hear how people describe those experiences. Because as you say, I certainly don't believe that they're necessarily like innate traits. I think they're somewhat like discovered traits. As you say, I don't think you would necessarily know in advance whether you have that resilience. But I think what you can see is, has someone been willing to sort of put themselves in that challenging situation, and how have they responded to it? And I think you learn a lot by listening to people talk about their experiences of that kind.
So I know that you've interviewed a lot of founders. You've had maybe 1,500 companies go through your accelerator worldwide?
Yeah, individuals. So as I was saying, we take individuals before they have a company. But yeah, we must have interviewed many thousands of founders, and we funded over 1,500.
And so when you do fund them, when you do accept them into your accelerator, what kind of resources do you give them? Or actually, what do you think are the most important things that a founder needs to have in order to be successful? And I can think of having a reading habit and reading the right books and having a coach that they can go to for questions. Like, what helps them and supports them on their journey?
Yeah, so one of our strong beliefs is that the single most valuable thing that you can have as a founder is a co-founder. Now, not everyone has one, and obviously there are many successful companies where is a sole founder. But in general, we think that your chances of success and your chances of enjoying the ride increase if you have a co-founder. Unfortunately, in most of the world, it's very hard to find a co-founder. If most people around you aren't even considering entrepreneurship, then the pool of people in your personal network who might be a good co-founder for you is likely to be very small, and many of the candidates are likely to be unsuitable. And so we think the most valuable resource that we provide at Entrepreneur First is a pool of other people like you, people who've gone through that same filter of they're smart problem solvers, they're determined and resilient, they're ambitious, all the things I was talking about. And they're looking for a co-founder too. And so if you think of Entrepreneur First as a 6-month program, it's really two halves. The first 3 months is all about finding a co-founder from within that pool of people that we funded at the same time. So we fund people in batches of 50 to 100 individuals. And what we say is, in this room, we believe there is someone who could be a great co-founder for you. Your job is to find them, and our job is to support and facilitate that journey. And so most of what we do in the first 3 months is actually just about helping people find the right team for them, and then within that team, refine the right idea that they're both excited about. And we do that through a lot of the things you mentioned, through coaching, through mentorship, through pointing people to resources that other people have written. But what it means is that at the end of the 3 months, roughly 80% of the people that join us have successfully found a co-founder and successfully found an idea that they're excited about. At that point, the kind of support and the resources that we provide flip, because we stop thinking of these people as individuals and we start thinking of them as companies, as startups. So then we invest some money in each of the companies, and we really ramp up the intensity of the mentorship, with the goal that by the end of the 6th month, people are ready to go out and raise venture funding if that's the right path for them.
When it comes to having a co-founder, I've personally never had a co-founder, and I didn't have the social skills. I didn't have the network to really go and find one. And I've had mixed experiences. I've started a lot of companies. One of them, I reached out to a networking friend, and he seemed absolutely fantastic. He was a neuroscientist. He was interested in it, but he had a job. And I said, okay, I'd fund it. And I just need your knowledge and your experience and a little bit of your work. And then unfortunately, he just sort of kind of fell off the bandwagon, and he just didn't really contribute. And so I had to just shut it down. So we didn't have that same level. Initially we were both excited, but his interest sort of died down, afterwards. And in other circumstances, I wouldn't say I had a co-founder, but it was an epiphany. As I started the company by myself, I was later just getting overwhelmed with all the things I had to do. And I didn't get an MBA or really understand the infrastructure of what it means to build a business. But eventually I found out that I should have an operations manager, somebody who would actually manage the operations so I can step out of it and then look at things from kind of a 10-foot pole distance to be able to go in and zoom and fix certain issues. And for me, I've been able to do that, at least with my current company, Support Ninja. I've been able to find a CEO, and he's been doing a fantastic job. But when it comes to co-founders, it has other issues like disagreements, and maybe one person puts some more money than the other. What experiences and stories have you encountered, maybe with a lesson or that you can think of regarding having a co-founder?
Yes, this is the most important part of our business, and it's where we've probably put the most effort into really designing a system and a methodology that supports people to make the right decision. Because I think it's certainly true that a bad co-founder or the wrong co-founder is worse than no co-founder at all. So one of the things that we believe is that a lot of the reason that it's so challenging for people to find the right co-founders for them is that we almost treat co-founding like marriage, but marriage on day one. So it's like you have to say, we're going to work together. We're going to, be equal partners in this company. It's like this big commitment from day one. And so that really increases, raises the bar and the friction to getting into a co-founding relationship. But also kind of raises the bar to getting out of a co-founding relationship. If you say you're going to co-found with someone, it's like incredibly awkward and difficult to get out of that once you're in. And so what we've done at Entrepreneur First is we've designed our whole process to lower the bar to trying out a co-founder, but also lowering the bar to getting out of a team that isn't working for you. And so during that first 3 months that I was talking about, we actually encourage people to be willing to just go in and try a number of co-founding relationships quickly and commit to them. But as soon as it feels like it's not the right one for you, be transparent and open and get out of that relationship.
Like speed dating.
Yeah, like dating, right? And so if you look at the most successful founders that we have, what's interesting is that the founders on average have been through 2.5 teams before they found the right one for them. So it's not that people join Entrepreneur First and then on day one meet the right co-founder for them and the rest is history. It's a real iterative process. And that iterative process, I think, allows people to really be sure what they're getting into before they have to commit.
Where do you find a co-founder? Are you just proposing that people apply for your accelerator and that you'll help them find one? Or are there other circumstances that people can try and find one? And should you co-found with a friend?
I mean, I think it is very, very challenging. And one of the reasons that we did design Entrepreneur First and built it and spent the last 8 years building it is because it is so difficult to find a co-founder. If you Google how to find a co-founder, there's just like basically endless blog posts of people bemoaning how challenging it is. And it's particularly true if you need a technical co-founder, which is what we specialize in at EF, is building relatively deep technology companies. So I mean, obviously I'm very biased, but I think the best place in the world to find a co-founder, if you don't have one already, is at Entrepreneur First. And if you want to find a technical co-founder to build a technology company, EF is designed to help you do that. I mean, outside that, obviously, it really comes down to, I think, two different dimensions. One is like, what are the skills that you need in a co-founder? And two is like, what is the relationship that you need with a co-founder? I think there's, starting a company with a friend makes sense in that hopefully the relationship piece is sort of relatively robust from the beginning. But I think the danger in that is often people, and I see this with teams that form outside EF and then, kind of I come across, quite often people will start a company with a friend, but actually neither of them will have the skills needed, or between them, they don't have all the skills needed to successfully build the company. I think it's particularly true in companies where there's a reasonably deep technical component. So I think it really is about balancing skills and relationship. And that is challenging. And that, as I say, is why we built the company that we did. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a sort of like nice idea, which is like you kind of have to earn a co-founder. And if you really want a co-founder, you have to be able to describe what it is that you're bringing to the table and why it is that your skills, your background, your experience makes you a good fit for the company that you're building. And I think if you can demonstrate value to someone else, then you make it much more likely that they'll want to sign up with you.
Is there any kind of communication system or structure that you've seen work the best in terms of cooperation, not only with, say, the founding team, but also their employees? There's tons of books on this. There's the EOS system, and I read that book and we were able to implement some of the elements, because prior we had meetings, but they were just all over the place, and now they're more structured. Now we rate the meetings and we actually ask, how can we improve the meetings? And it's obviously it's important to have open and honest communication with your co-founder, but some people's personality, they tend to put stuff under the rug, or they don't talk about it, and then it just sort of blows up. And I've learned a lot, even just reading things like the 5 love languages and learning that everyone communicates love differently. So in your experience, what are some of those structures, those methods, those communication styles that you've seen work the best?
The way I would think about it is that there's no one method that's going to work for everyone, but there are probably some core principles that whatever methodology you come up with, which have, and as you say, there are several out there that have been written about. I think there are going to be core principles they have in common. You've already touched on some. I think one is about transparency. So, particularly within co-founding teams, if you don't have transparency, then you're stuck from the start. But I think, another one is that, and one thing that we observe all the time with founders, and has been also my own experience of being a founder, is often founders feel that they're repeating themselves and that the team will be sort of bored of hearing them say the same things. I'm particularly thinking of, the very first question that you started this interview with around like, what is your why? Actually, one thing I strongly believe is that founders cannot over communicate the why of what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And if you want to have great communication in the team, the most important thing is alignment. You all have to be pulling in the same direction. You cannot have alignment if people don't understand why you're all doing what you're doing. And so, if you think of like analogies in say, political communications, the joke in political communications is by the time that you've repeated yourself so many times that you are, kind of bored to tears of your own message, that's the time the voters are just starting to hear it. And in a way, I think it's the same in companies sometimes. I talk about our mission all day, every day at Entrepreneur First. And sometimes I worry that the team must be bored of it. But actually, constantly underlining why you're doing what you're doing is so key for alignment. And as you scale, that is the necessary foundation for great communication, is that you all know why you're doing what you're doing. So again, we have a methodology at EF. We have a number of standing meetings, which are about sharing what's going on and being very kind of concrete and clear around plans, progress and problems. That's sort of how we structure it. It's not going to be the right thing for everyone, but I think without having the alignment around the why, you can have the best communication strategy in the world and it's going to fall flat.
Right. Yeah. And that can separate easily a company that is just built. It might generate money. It might be able to establish that process from providing the service to making money and being profitable. But those companies don't typically grow. They don't typically scale. And the people who work for them, they might have a high attrition rate because they go there. Maybe it just feels like a job. And I've hired those people where you have the employees who just come from 9 to 5, and maybe they're inspired by something else. And that's okay, because not everybody is always going to be behind the vision of what they're working for. But on the other hand, if you can have that vision and that mission that people are able to follow and stand behind, as a founder, it maybe you've repeated it so many times that you feel like it has no effect. But even recently, we just had our first team retreat, our first company retreat. And it was so inspiring to meet some people who just tell me how inspiring I am to them and how important the vision is of the company that I founded. And it's so important to be reminded of that, is because you start to just doubt yourself, even as the founder.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where I think having a truly authentic mission that, you as the founder really believe in and that is genuinely your motivation for why you do what you do. If you have that, then actually, even when you feel you're repeating yourself and you're saying it again and again, the same thing, if it's authentically like what you believe in and why you do what you do, it's actually very easy to talk about that. That's what I find is that I spend lots of my time explaining and selling EF to investors, to entrepreneurs, to other stakeholders, the media, etc., to the team, to people we want to hire. But actually, because it's really real for me, it is why I get up in the morning. It's actually easy to do, and it never really, for me, falls flat.
Can you give me, just switching gears a little bit, can you tell me about some of the successful exits that you've had, say some of the successful companies you've had, and what do you think made them successful?
Yeah, I mean, so in general, our portfolio is quite young, and so we've scaled up a lot over the last 18 months. So, we've probably funded at this stage, 300 companies, so 1,500 individuals. But most of those companies we actually funded in the last 18 months. So it's still quite early, and we're certainly, given that we're trying to build world-changing companies, it's going to take a long time. So I hope that most of the success is in the future. But we have been very fortunate to have some sort of earlier than expected wins where companies achieved an exit very early on in their life. I think the most prominent and most surprising to us all, including the founders, was the story of a company with a very memorable name, Magic Pony Technology. This was a company founded by two super impressive people, Rob Bishop and Zihan Wang. They joined our third cohort in London back in the right at the end of 2014. They met each other at Entrepreneur First, and they sort of realized, if you go back to that idea of edge I was talking before, Rob had been one of the founding team members of Raspberry Pi, which is an organization in the UK that builds very cheap, very small, low power computers, been very, very successful. And he sort of had a really deep understanding of what it took to scale technology companies. And then Zihan, he had a very deep technical background. He actually had a PhD in medical imaging. And when they got talking, they realized that there were a number of ideas that they felt were at the intersection of their edges. One of which was thinking about how to change the way that video is broadcast and streamed on the internet. So, there's this idea, Mark Andreessen's idea, software is eating the world. They used to like to joke, video is eating the internet. If you look at how much of internet bandwidth globally is consumed by video now, it's the vast majority. And in fact, I think this was true. I don't know if this is currently up to date, but there was a point where Netflix alone was like a third of internet traffic globally at peak times. And so what Rob and Zihan realized was, if you could reduce the cost of broadcasting and streaming video, you could massively reduce both infrastructure spend, but also increase the scalability of the internet in general. And so they came up with an extremely deep technical solution to the cost of streaming, which was to use machine learning and particularly a technique called super resolution to compress video, effectively compress video so that it could be broadcast or streamed rather at a low resolution. And this turned out to be very, very valuable technology, very, very successfully implemented. And the bit that I said at the start was a surprise to us all was they graduated from Entrepreneur First in March of 2015, and in June of 2016, so just 15 months later, Twitter acquired the company for $150 million. Wow. So it's a pretty crazy fast turnaround. I think we will never beat quite the IRR on that investment in terms of how quickly it came to fruition. But it was an amazing moment for those two founders, obviously for their team, but also for us at Entrepreneur First. I think it gave us a lot of confidence that the model was genuinely creating a lot of value. And I think it also, really started or kickstarted the idea of, the network effects in our business, because Rob and Zihan obviously, made a lot of money from that transaction. And, they've become investors in EF themselves, which is a really nice sort of cyclical part of the story that, they started as entrepreneurs within Entrepreneur First, and now they're investors in Entrepreneur First. And I think it kind of shows this sort of virtuous cycle that happens in startup ecosystems, and hopefully it's just one of many, many more to come down the line for us.
Right. And you can achieve that exponential growth. It's probably the most difficult to get to that first success, or to have the right people. But once you get the ball rolling, then it just can exponentially grow from there. And in my eyes, it seems like you've been, even though your company hasn't been around for a long time, it seems that Entrepreneur First has been fairly successful, and you've been able to have, I think you said $300 million or so in exits from the startups that.
That's right. Yes, we've had about $300 million of exits. The portfolio was raised, I think now north of $400 million, over $1.5 billion of enterprise value. We've raised a couple of $100 million ourselves. And yeah, I mean, if you told me that 8 years ago when I left my job and started Entrepreneur First, I think I'd have been very would I be surprised? I don't know. I'd be kind of really delighted with the progress that we've made.
Is that the ambition that you had when you first started? Is to be where you are today, or is this sort of out of this world in a way, if you look back on that mindset that you had early on 8 years ago?
Well, I think the reality is that we thought about the business in a very different way back then. So, one thing I like to say to our founders is that you can be wrong about an awful lot as a founder and still succeed. On day one, you don't need to have everything figured out. But what you do need is to be right about one big thing. And the way I would think about the history of EF is that, back then, I was very young when I started the company. I was 25 years old. And, to be totally frank, I was totally unqualified to start it. I think Alice would probably say the same. We'd never worked in tech. We'd never worked in startups. We'd never worked in investment. We were really unfamiliar with most of the core of what we ended up doing. Therefore, a lot of our assumptions were wrong. But there was one thing that we were right about, which I think turned out to be the most important thing, which was this idea of investing in talent. And, the core belief that was true then is true now is we believed if you could just get the best people together in a room, then great things would happen. And, we early on, the business was very different. It had a different business model. We didn't even think of ourselves as venture capitalists. But what we did do was focus on just getting extraordinary people through the door and into the community. So I think if you told me we'd be where we are today, I'd be very surprised, partly because we didn't even think of ourselves as VCs. But yeah, I mean, I think certainly 3 months in where it was starting to feel like, wow, this is actually really hard work, I think we'd have been over the moon with where we got to.
Is there ever a time that you just wanted to call it quits, or maybe you were sued and then you thought this is going to be the end of the business, and you had an imposter syndrome of like, what the heck am I doing? I can't do this.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a number of points on the way that were pretty low points. So I think one was actually just almost right at the beginning. We got started, we were very enthusiastic, we were very optimistic. And then within a few weeks, I think it became clear that we were really quite out of our depth, for all the reasons that I mentioned, our lack of experience. And I think in particular, the entrepreneur first model really does sort of break a lot of the conventional wisdom of venture capital. We invest in people who just met each other. We invest in people who just started working on the idea. We invest in technical founders to be CEOs, and like all these things. At least I should clarify. At least in European venture capital at the time, these were like not the norm, and these were not how people thought of the way to build great businesses. And so we got a lot of not pushback, but people just sort of saying, yeah, awesome, great, good luck with that, but very clearly actually thinking that we were doomed. And so I think realizing that and realizing that maybe we were out of our depth, that was quite a sobering experience. And I think what kept us going was partly pride. We got started, so we should give it a go. But also, and I think this is an important message that we always share with our founders, lots of people thought it was a terrible idea, but the one group that seemed to think it was a good idea were the individuals that we were reaching out to and suggesting they join the program. And actually, as I think all entrepreneurs would say, what your customers think is more important than what any other stakeholder thinks. And so I think that kept us going was just seeing great applications come in from people who looked amazing on paper. So that was one low point. And there was another low point a couple of years after that, so when we just started our second program in London. And, I think if we're honest with ourselves, we learned a lot of the wrong lessons from the first program. We got very lucky on the first program. It worked really well. And I think we probably got a little bit overconfident in our view of what worked and how it worked.
And can you just explain what a program is?
Yeah, sorry. So this is the sort of 6-month period of activity that I was describing earlier. So the 3 months of finding a co-founder and refining the idea, followed by 3 months of sort of building out the company and getting it ready to go into the market. So the reason I call it a program is we have 100 people. These days 100, back then a much smaller group. 100 people join on the same day, and they all meet each other. They find co-founder within that group, and then there are sort of fixed dates. There's a halfway point where we make a decision on whether there's something viable there that they should continue with. And then at the end of the 6th month, there's a big demo day where we invite hundreds of investors, and each of the companies pitch to them. So yeah, when I talk about the second program, I mean the second time we had a group of individuals join us as prospective founders, and it was just a much more challenging experience than the first one. I think because the things we thought we'd learned from the first one didn't seem to apply, and so a lot of things went wrong, and we didn't form as many teams. The teams that we did form seemed more fragile, and I remember going for a walk with Alice and saying wow, maybe we just got it all wrong and we don't know what we're doing. And we got through that, I think, just by being very determined to figure out what was true and what we had learned. And actually, a lot of the most important innovations in how we run the program and how we've designed Entrepreneur First came out of that very tough second program. And we learned a lot from that and kept going. And after that, things did get a lot easier. But yeah, there's always challenges along the way. I don't think there's ever since then been a moment where I actually thought I would quit. There's been times where I've been like, what have we gotten ourselves into? And I think, again, a risk of being a broken record, I do think this idea of do you authentically believe your mission? Is it genuinely the motivation for you? If the answer is yes, then it is a lot easier to push through those really difficult moments.
And I think it's also difficult for entrepreneurs to separate a good idea from a bad one. And there's entrepreneurs who create a business who are trying to solve a problem that needs to be solved for other people. And then I've seen just so many startups that the founders think it's a good idea because they're solving a problem, but they're solving a problem that nobody else has, that maybe, they encountered and they thought this would be a great idea for it, but they're maybe creating a convenience and not really solving a problem. Do you have any advice on how you would separate that, or know how do you validate an idea? And I know I've also heard that there's entrepreneurs who created a form and then they would hand this form out and say, would you pay money for this? And a lot of people will say yes. But then if you ask them for money, then a significant percentage of them won't give you money because, it's one thing for them to say yes in front of you, but another thing to give them money. So how do you validate an idea or get advice and know whether it's a problem versus a convenience?
Yeah, I think that's such an important sort of step for an entrepreneur. I mean, I think there's sort of a couple of parts to it. So one is, I think you do need to build an extremely deep understanding of the customer and the problem. And I think often people underestimate that because people are so anxious that they might have a bad idea, that they get so excited when anyone gives them positive feedback that it's very easy to sort of cling to the positive feedback and say, see, it's great, it's working. And so you kind of makes you take shortcuts. The importance of validation is to be extremely suspicious of positive feedback. Now, that's not to put a dampener on, you need to maintain your enthusiasm and your excitement. But exactly as you said, you want to be at the stage where people are either, if you're doing something on the consumer side, actually paying money, or if it's not something that people can immediately pay money for. So again, like a lot of the companies that we're funding at EF are deep tech companies that it's going to be, a year or more before they even have a product. Then it's about, do you understand the incentive system and the pressures on the customer sufficiently that you actually understand what it will take to sell into them? And you've had multiple conversations with people who would be the customer, and you understand exactly the environment in which they're making that decision, what the trade-offs they're facing are, what they do now. I think it's sort of all about, for a B2B business, what is the sophistication of your understanding of the purchase decision? Now, There's a book that I always recommend to founders all around the world. We recommend in each of our programs this book. It's called The Mom Test by a friend of ours called Rob Fitzpatrick. And it's a really great book, quite short, extremely readable, on how to validate an idea. I'd encourage people to read it, but in brief, the idea of the mom test is, if founders are sort of, it's very easy to fall into the trap of asking questions in such a way that people will tell you what they think you want to hear rather than the truth. Mm-hmm. And so the kind of idea in the title of the mom test is, if you ask your mom whether your startup idea is a good idea, of course she's going to say yes. She's your mom. But it doesn't mean that you've got a good idea. And so what Rob does in the book is he really breaks down very practically, how can you design questions to ask customers about the problem that you're solving and about your proposed solution that will really get them to tell the truth to you, rather than get them to tell you what they think you want to hear, which is very often what ends up happening.
The mom test. I like that. I'm gonna keep that. And another question is, do you believe in focusing on building your idea where your main focus is user acquisition and growth versus money? Because I know that from a VC perspective, in say the past decade, it was really heavily focused on how many users can you get as fast as possible, and we're going to worry about monetization later. And I think the times have started to change recently. And now we've had companies mature enough to the extent that they went over that hump where we have companies like Instagram who have heavily monetized and are making a lot of money. But I've now started to see articles and studies showing that the effect of influencers is actually decreasing. And I know that when I browse Instagram, I just see, it feels like every 3 or 4 posts, I see an ad for a company that's specifically targeted towards me. And admittedly, I've bought some of those products, but at the same time, I have to ask myself, do I really need it? But going off in a rabbit hole, going back to user growth, like, what do you think they should focus on? Is it more important to monetize first, or to get the user acquisition?
I think it really depends on what the vision of the company is. So what you need to do is look forward to what you want the company to be and figure out what are the real risks that you face. So if you're building the kind of business that is all about network effects and kind of having the biggest network, so like a LinkedIn or a Facebook, then you obviously shouldn't focus on monetization, because actually monetization will come once you've dominated the market. If, on the other hand, you're in a business where effectively the way to get attention and user numbers is to give away something below cost, but actually the suspicion is the minute you start charging for it, if charging is the right model for you, then the growth goes away. Then you're just kidding yourself by focusing on growth. I mean, what I would say is most companies in the space that we invest in deep tech, what they should really do is focus on validating, one, that they can build the technology and that it works, but actually more importantly, that there is genuine demand for the thing that they're building. And usually, in deep tech, almost always you want a product where you're actually charging for it. Offhand, it's hard to think of it. Well, I suppose you could argue Google was the original sort of deep tech company that didn't charge users. But I suppose my broad point is it really depends on what the long run business model is of the company and where therefore the biggest risk lies. If the risk is actually willingness to pay, you definitely want to test willingness to pay early on. If the risk is actually that someone ends up building a bigger network that becomes impossible to compete with, then it may well be rational to focus on growth.
Mm. One of my last questions is, how the heck did you get Reid Hoffman to become a primary investor of your fund?
Yeah, so Reid led a round of funding into Entrepreneur First a couple of years ago in 2017 and joined our board as a result of that. And he has been like a really transformational figure for us. I mean, he's really just one of the most extraordinary individuals, both in terms of his like strategic mind and his sort of ability to understand the problem and get to the heart of it very quickly, but also, of course, his network and his ability to open doors. I mean, I think Reid's obviously been a wildly successful entrepreneur, not just once, but several times. And, he's obviously, as a result of LinkedIn, become a billionaire. So, he absolutely is looking for financial returns, and, he's a very savvy investor. But equally, I think he's definitely at the stage of his life where there also has to be a fit with his mission and sort of how he wants the world to, change. And what I think he liked about Entrepreneur First is that the mission around finding the founders that the world is missing out on really resonated with his belief, his optimism around entrepreneurship as a force for good in the world. But I think he also liked that it was a extremely contrarian take on the accelerator model. So, I think in general, obviously Y Combinator has been a runaway success in the accelerator world. But beyond that, accelerators have been a very challenging business model for people to run it successfully. And, I think one of the things that Reid liked about EF was that it's a totally different approach to that model. So instead of saying apply as a company, we say apply as an individual. Instead of saying, tell us what your idea is, we say tell us about you. And so I think when you combine those things like, a contrarian take on the business, a mission that really resonated with his own mission in life, but also an opportunity, I think, to generate hopefully very, very large amounts of economic value by identifying extraordinary individuals who otherwise might not start a company. I think those three things together made it very attractive for him. And, it's been a fantastic thing for us, and, really changed the game for us.
Do you have any goals that you hope to achieve in the near future that with Entrepreneur First?
Yeah, so we always say, for us to achieve our mission, there's the number of milestones we have to hit along the way. And one of the frameworks we always use internally for thinking about this is EF will only fulfill its mission in the long run if we are accessible to every great potential founder in the world, if we're attractive to those people and they want to be part of it, and if we're effective for those people and, that we actually help them achieve their goals. And so, right now, a big push for us is on accessibility. So, we started the company in London in 2011. For the first 5 years, we only operated in London. And then we opened an office in Singapore back in 2016. Then it started to be clear that it was actually working pretty well and was ready to scale. And that's actually when we raised the money from Reid. And so what we came to is, we should use Reid's money and the money that the other investors put into EF to expand globally. And so in 2018, we opened up sites in Berlin, in Paris, in Hong Kong, and in Bangalore. So when I think about our goals right now, actually they still go back to, accessibility, effectiveness, and attractiveness. I think we're going to do more growth. A big goal around opening new sites in 2020, but also around those other two, attractiveness and effectiveness. So we're constantly looking at how do we increase the number and caliber of applications that we get to the program, but also how do we help the companies that do graduate from EF get the very best outcomes. And so, we have pretty clear goals around each of those three, around the number of people that we're reaching through the program, the number of really great applicants that accept our offer, and then around kind of how we support the best companies to raise capital from the best investors in the world. So I think if we achieve those three things in 2020, then we'll be in a really great place.
Fantastic. And where can people go to either apply as a person or with an idea and follow you and learn more from what you have to offer?
You can find out more about Entrepreneur First and apply on our website, which is joinef.com. So joinef.com. Easiest way to find me is probably on Twitter, where I'm at Matthew Clifford. And I also write a weekly newsletter talking about tech, politics, society, culture, which is linked to in my on my Twitter page as well.
Fantastic. Matt, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Hey guys, this is Cody again. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Mindhack. And if you're interested in getting more Mindhack-worthy stuff straight to your inbox, then you might consider signing up for my weekly newsletter. It often contains links to new episodes, blog posts, and other interesting finds I found on the interweb in the past week. It pretty much focuses around productivity and efficiency. So if that's your thing, then be sure to visit my website at codymclain.com. That's MCLAIN.com to sign up. Also, if there are any interesting websites, companies, books, blog posts, quotes, or anything else that was mentioned in this episode, you can find it all and more by visiting the official website for the Mindhack Show at mindhack.com. And as always, if you have any feedback, good or bad, I want to hear it. Send me a tweet, email, or what have you on either of my websites, as my goal with this show is to give you the maximum value in the shortest amount of time. That's all for now, guys. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you guys again soon.